to share my screen. Okay. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to present my thesis. It's a little challenging to put it all in 15 minutes, but I'll try my best. For those who have not, read my thesis, just a quick, my thesis is about incorporating components of the Laban Barteniev movement system into Kuchipudi dance. So what was my motivation? My motivation was largely arose from my teaching experience, my living in America for the last 30 years as a Kuchipudi practitioner, as a Kuchipudi dancer. And the concerns were largely about teaching methodology that we use here, and also the biggest challenge being inadequate face time with students. We all have about 1 or 2 hours a week and not 2 to 4 hours a day that we all grew up learning dance. And so this led me to I felt a need for improving Kuchipudi pedagogy just for my own students. And so this thesis gave me an opportunity to look into this Laban Barteniev movement science, which is a Western, more modern, recent movement science, which is used very ubiquitously amongst Western dancers and actors. A couple of my own Bharatanatyam colleagues have gone through the certification program and use it in their Bharatanatyam training as well. So I started first with trying to draw some comparisons between the Natya Shastra and LBMS, mostly just as a way to try and understand, are there any similarities? Are there any differences? And so this is a very cursory comparison. So the main complementarities that I found was that the essential role of movement for both these sciences, movement sciences, was to communicate and connect with the audience. The essential role and the essential purpose being to connect with the audience, as Rasa theory says. And this was very much Laban, the founder of LBMS, intention as well. And the other thing that struck me was the holistic approach that LBMS had, which is very similar to our approach as Indian classical dancers to movement and dance. Body-mind integration has to be there. You cannot think of a movement without its inner component of the mind. And also the interrelatedness of various art forms, which is so ingrained with Indian dance. We cannot do without music. We cannot do without the other related art forms. And it was interesting for me to see that Rudolf Laban himself was a painter, a sculptor. He was a dancer, a choreographer. And in many of his writings, he talks about the importance of the interrelatedness. And of course, both these movement sciences stem from a deeply analytical process. Some of the differences that I was able to identify is that LBMS views movement and also places the onus of movement selection on an individual. And it's through the individual's perspective that movement is communicated. Meaning they have to go through the analysis and come up with the movement that they seem pertinent for themselves. So it does not prescribe meaning to movement as such. And it's also an approach to movement that's not limited to a dance style. Its applications are seen in industry, factories, therapeutic conditions, actors, and dancers. So with that brief introduction to the comparison and differences, I wanted to now dive into LBMS itself. LBMS has 4 basic components, the first one being the body component. The body component addresses the what of movement. What part of the body is involved in a movement? And Irmgard Barteniev, who's the second co-founder of LBMS, is primarily responsible for extending this component. The second component is the effort component, which really deals with the how of movement. What is the quality of the movement with which we move? And it's got a very elaborate structure called motion factors, and it's very, very elaborate. I won't be able to go into to it at this point in time, but that's the second component. The third component is space, where which talks about where of movement, where in space do we move, and through his spatial theory, he gives us more tangible framework for that. And his fourth component is shape, which is the why of movement, which this thesis does not address. So now I'd like to talk more about the first component, which is the body component. And this body component is what Bartenieff, as I said before, was primarily responsible for extending. And I am saying that that both Bartenieff as well as Laban were very clear that we need to have a basic understanding of physiology and of inner body muscular engagement, skeletal engagements, in order to truly understand how to use our body in movement. And with that, Bartenieff's contribution was the six body organizations of breath, core, distal, head, tail, and all of these six connective pathways. These are internal connective pathways. What I find interesting is that she develops these concepts from her work with children and as a physical therapist, and found that these were connective pathways that each individual discovers. All of us discover it when we go through the stages from infancy to toddlerhood. When we are born, we learn to breathe. When the baby starts controlling the limbs, they are discovering core distal connective pathways. When the baby lifts her head, she's discovering the head tail. When the baby is toppling over, she's discovering the body half connectivity. When the baby sits up, she's learned to use the lower body to support the upper body. And when the baby starts walking, then that's the cross lateral. So these are she calls them primal body connections, which allow the dancer to become much more aware of internal connective pathways in movement. It also allows for mental imagery to be used to explore movement, and also allows you to assess your strengths and weaknesses and attend to your weaknesses if you so choose to. And also with the presumption that completely potentializing the functional aspect of your movement will definitely extend its expressiveness. And she talks about four overarching, and these overarching concepts are actually across LBMS, not necessarily just for the body component. Inner, outer, stability, mobility, function, expression, and exertion, recuperation. These are concepts that point to the fact that the body-mind integration is critical. It's how inner state of mind affects outer movement, vice versa. And each of these really are referring to the body-mind integration in LBMS movement science. So I want to now talk briefly about the space component. The space component of Laban's work largely deals with spatial intent and spatial awareness and spatial harmony. And he does this by, he came up with the concept called kinesphere. And kinesphere is really the reach space of a dancer. It varies from the size of a dancer. A tall dancer will have a different kinesphere to a short dancer. The kinesphere changes at different levels. The kinesphere moves with the dancer. But what it does for the dancer is it provides a very finite space within which they can relate to space in a very precise manner. And having this relationship, they argue, will increase precision in movement, will increase spatial intent. And again, that will affect the functionality of the movement, which will again have greater expressive potential for that. And he develops actually many spatial models, but he starts with unidimensional movements using the cross of axes, saying that there are really three planes of movement: up and down, right and left, front and back. And using these simple unidimensional movements, he then builds his spatial modules. So we in Kuchipudi, of course, have unidimensional, and when you connect the peripheries and use more than one dimension at a time, then you're creating two-dimensional movements. And that gives us the octahedron spatial module, not here. And then he introduces diagonal scales, which become the cube, because we, through our cross-lateral connectivity, can also present many cross-lateral movements. And cross-lateral movements exist, three-dimensional movements exist in Kuchipudi, giving it more tangible set points and movement pathways gives us a more finite relationship. I'm not going to go into icosahedron. This is a complex structure that is formed as a result of juxtaposition of all three two-dimensional planes that he talks about. That's really very interesting subject for choreography and through his concept of spatial harmony, which this thesis does not address at all. The third and final component of LBMS that this thesis addresses is called the efforts theory. And the efforts theory has largely to do with communication and portrayal of emotion or character or plot, what have you. And it's an extremely complex analytical framework that Laban outlines, but I have simplified it enormously by saying that the first thing that he says is you need to identify and reflect upon given circumstances. Given circumstances, they identify as the time of day, place of day, character, situations, decor, music, costumes, props, remarkably similar to what we have in the Natya Shastra, and Natya Shastra outlines for us. And this is going to most likely and almost always result in an intuitive choice of movements and attitudes that come with the movements that we all make. And this changes a lot based on whether based on your personality as a dancer as well as your experience as a dancer. For Indian classical dance, this person, sorry, that was not to come yet, but at this point, we would go to the Natya Shastra, choose the movements that we feel based on our intuitive choice, based on all the suggestions that the Natya Shastra gives, to choose our movements, to bring the right attitude to portray character. Whereas LBMS has this efforts framework, which I don't have the time to go into, but I just want you to, I wanted to present the framework through which he sees the thought process has to go through. So after you've made your intuitive choices, you analyze those movement choices and attitudes through his efforts framework. You go through this process of elimination and clarification, which then finally leads to a final deliberate choice of attitude and movement that best portrays the character, which then leads to Abhinaya. And so based on this, I just want to say that I do believe, based on my thesis, that LBMS does have potential to be an effective tool to further enhance Kuchipudi's richness, depth, and versatility, and that I don't believe LBMS can dilute Kuchipudi in any way. It may not have impact, or it could strengthen it, but it does not dilute it. My future recommendations for this thesis is that we do need to develop exercises and training programs that incorporate the LBMS principles for dancers and dance teachers to truly then conduct scientific and rigorous evaluations to really determine the effectiveness in a more scientific way rather than my present conclusions, which are based on an analysis only. Thank you all.
Stop sharing. Good morning, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Very good presentation. Basically, I want all the students who are presenting oral defense to understand the purpose of oral defense is not to find causes. The purpose of country to strengthen the components of the thesis, tell you where it could have been better, and to learn from you what are your inferences. Then the thesis is a thesis because you found something, you discovered something. There is some contribution from your side. Just compiling and collecting material does not make any sense. You just want to see all those components. I will now throw it open to Vishada to first ask the question, and then I follow that. Vishada?
Anuradha, I thoroughly enjoyed the thesis, as I have said in the comments, and congratulations to Anu for facilitating the thesis like this. Can't hear me? Okay. I enjoyed the thesis thoroughly. Okay. So I have a few, it's not questions, it's basically discussion, which I would have done earlier also with you otherwise. So one question, one doubt I have is, Bhartini F, did she do it for dance specifically? Laban didn't do it for dance particularly, but did she do it for dance particularly, or was
So a little bit of her history. She was a dancer to begin with. She was Laban's student to begin with. But when she emigrated to the USA during the Nazi conflict, she was not. Didn't have any opportunities to
dance?
become part of the dance world. So she became a physical therapist and started working with polio children suffering from polio. And so she then saw whatever she saw, she applied Laban's principles because they were for any field, for therapeutic too. And in the process, she made these new observations of how these developmental stages actually affect how you move, and through motivation and through changes of attitude, how she could motivate these children. She had enormous success in getting polio children to walk, which nobody ever before could, because of the principles of body-mind integration that she used in developing those children. And so when later in her life, when she moved back to the dance world, she began to incorporate her knowledge from her work as a physical therapist into the dance. She found that a lot of the dancers lost their knowledge of these primal body connections. They needed to be retrained on those primal body connections because they picked up bad movement habits, and they were not able to connect deeply with those connections, which helped them make movement much more easy and more expressive.
Okay. So just a few technical observations is that I like the way you use the methodology without making the methodology loud there. It just integrates into the way you form the thesis, which is very nice. And you have used the terms emotion and expressiveness for rasa, which is a little problematic. And rasa is a little too deep, Anuradha. Just an observation that I'm making for you, because when it's been used a little superficially in the thesis. Maybe you can mention that it's a little deep. You can give a footnote saying this is a very crust level description of the rasa, because you have the spectator involved, you have vasanas involved. Rasa is a complete, it's a through lives analysis. So it can't be just spoken about like that. Okay, then you have to mention that this is Vempati style specific in the first paragraph itself. You have to. It is very important because there is a completely different genre of Kuchipudi, which is beautiful by itself, but does not follow the same body technique as Vempati style does. So you have to be aware of that and mention that. You must make the change in your thesis. So you did later, do it in the beginning. And so when you said Indian dance, what did you mean by Indian dance?
I was talking primarily about the classical dance forms, I guess.
So you need to specify that it's the modern classical dance.
Yeah, I think I was saying classical Indian dance almost everywhere in the thesis.
When you were talking about the Natya Shastra, somehow, somewhere I got the feeling you were talking about the Angika Abhinaya of Natya Shastra as the same as Kuchipudi,
No.
Somewhere it gave me, so I read it again and I wrote it down saying essentially the study is on the theory mentioned in the Natya Shastra and Bharatanatyam and not Indian dance is what I wrote. But then later you came to Kuchipudi particularly. So when you're talking about Indian dance, a little bit, at least a mention of the other modern classical dances and then narrowing it down to Kuchipudi will be fair to the whole scene of Indian dance.
My focus is primarily Kuchipudi. I was just saying
Right.
that this perhaps can be extended to other classical. So that was very perfunctory for me. For me, it was all about Kuchipudi comparison.
Absolutely. So when you become specific, you have to come from the large to the specific, from the broader to the specific. Just a mention, and then you come to this. Because the reader will quickly say, okay, if Kuchipudi is one form, what are the other forms? Other classical forms.
You're
Just a
saying
mention of this.
You can mention all the styles that I'm
Yes,
talking about?
the styles that are pan-India. Then a reader might want to Google and check how does this work in the other forms, and what are the other forms. Just a mention or just one line of those. Okay, then a technical observation is when you say the notes for this have been taken from this book completely. Technically, it's not accepted. You have to give specifically which chapter, which page, who quoted it.
I think I continue to do that, right? I continue to write IBID page 5, page 7, page. I didn't want to overdo it because then
The flow is lost.
Yeah, the flow is lost.
I get it. The flow was perfect. It was like I just enjoyed reading the whole thing. But this is a technical question, Anuradha. Maybe in the footnote you have to say so and so book, so and so chapter, so and so page. Not in the body of it. No, in a few places you have said the notes have been taken from this book. So maybe you can just look into it. It's a small thing that can be. I just wanted to, it's a curious observation, that question about Krura and Eliopsias, where the meeting point of the two. Do you think we can connect it to the Trika that Natya Shastra talks about in the Parsva Bhedas and the Kati Bhedas, where you turn the Trika and you bring the Trika back, that point of meeting of the spine and the hip bone? Just look into it. I have a feeling it's the same as the Trika. Trika is the tailbone thing where, the end of the spine and the hip where they meet, that T-junction there. So it could be the same thing. So, is this why you had Nritta in your Ashtapadi?
I don't know. I mean, it's not a conscious decision, right? It's just something that feels right to me. It's like I said, whenever we choose movement, we bring our own personalities and our own life experiences.
Right. So that's another observation I had. I'm sorry cutting you in because I know sir and he will quickly stop me from talking. So that's another observation I had, that there's a lot of experience in it. It's not picking material and putting it there, as sir said. So that's another thing I really wanted to compliment you about. Now, there is a statement which is very problematic, and I think you should take it off, when you say, while a confident and naturally coordinated dancer extends to the far-reach space, cautious and uncertain dancers might seek comfort in near-reach space. This is extremely problematic because you have the extremely confident Devadasis who just danced in the place they sat. They didn't move 1 inch out of the space that they are in, and their space is just that much. It didn't go beyond.
But then if you're asking me to write that it's Vempati Master Garu's style I'm talking about, I'm no longer talking about Devadasis then.
Anything. That sentence is very generic. that sentence is not Vempati specific there at least. Or you mention, because a Kathak dancer will come and say, we don't cover the whole stage like Vempati style does. Does it mean we are not confident? Kathak dancer will dance just in one place.
Mm-hmm.
So either you make it very specific or you take the sentence off. Yeah. Now, I have a big problem with the effort thing, much as I appreciate it, that the subtle has not been visited. The subtle which goes beyond, being a yoga person, I completely enjoyed it. But then, being a yoga person, I was also looking for a little more in depth, that little more, where is the consciousness in this whole thing? We spoke about mind, we spoke about body, and it's fantastic training. I just feel this is the first step towards a larger goal.
Mm-hmm.
This is one step towards a larger goal.
I think I would like to say here that this is a very basic exposition of the efforts theory, because
Yes.
effort theory, my exposure to efforts theory comes from 3 weekends, 1 weekend of Laban's work, 1 weekend of Bartaniev's work, practical experience of a workshop, and my own readings and understanding and analysis, when it actually is a 2-year degree to truly understand the efforts theory. And I've really touched the tip of the iceberg, because the scope of master's degree thesis does not allow for it.
I agree.
But
Totally.
I found it, for example, I would just want to give you one example. In the efforts theory, I did not really go into the concept as much about incomplete efforts, when they talk, what was very interesting to me is when you use two effort factors, any two effort factors, when they meet, you create momentary states, momentary feelings. And when I read about this state and drives, there's a concept called state and a concept called drives. The states reminded me of our Vyabhichari Vibhavas, about transitory feelings, transitory movements, the emotions that just are for a split second. So they address all of those, and there is a lot more complexity to the efforts theory, which a master's level thesis, where I was trying to do too much by already focusing on 3 components.
Right.
It's a very in-depth analysis.
So, I must admit that ever since you took up the topic with me, I have been doing my own work on this thing, because I was very taken up by this whole theory, and I read that book, Everybody is a Body.
Mm-hmm.
And I have done a little bit of study on this. And in fact, I did my homework before coming for your Viva. So I do understand there is a lot more. I still feel there is a little more. I'm not demeaning or discounting the system at all, Anuradha, and I'm in full appreciation of it. I have a problem. We have something called the Indian Chinese, which all of us like. That's something that's tweaked from the Chinese cuisine, right? But now in India, that's what we like. We are all very comfortable with it. The Chinese will look down upon it. They will say, we have nothing to do with this cuisine. We cannot eat the Chinese cuisine at all, the real Chinese cuisine. But this has become one cuisine by itself, Indian Chinese. So my only fear is, with so much focus on Angika and delineation of the body, which the scholars of India could have done, probably there's a reason they did not do it, that there is a danger of dancers being stuck with the body and not going beyond it. And it happens. So,
sorry to interrupt, but I do not believe efforts is Angika.
Yes, it is not.
It's completely to do with portrayal of character.
Yes, which I have seen. So, portrayal of character, but then the minute you go to the character, it involves a whole lot of study and cultural background. So, my fear is just that should not be compromised on. what happens is, because of the aesthetic beauty that is created with all this Angika and the character portrayal to perfection with angle and everything else, I don't want that thing that is so core to Indian dance to be lost. That's what happens generally when you see a beautiful piece of dance. You go back saying, yeah, it was very beautiful, very nicely done, but did it touch your heart? Well, yeah, it was beautiful.
No, but that you're assuming that there is no rasa. Assuming pure angular movement at the cost of rasa. I don't think, I think they're completely different things. The nritta component is different from the efforts component. The nritta component has to do with technique, and even the technique, spatial harmony does not mean it has to be angles and straight lines. There can be many beautiful curved lines. Spatial harmony has nothing to do with straight angular lines, first of all. And pure improving technique through good posture does not take away from the ability to have very beautifully expressed sentiment through the efforts.
So
There is no, I do not believe that Laban is going to dilute Kuchipudi. That was one of my conclusions, right? That it will not take away, because it can either not have an impact or it can strengthen it.
I have not said that it will take away. I'm just paranoid about a certain system settling down, and not going beyond. I just normalizing things may not be what we are looking for. That little nuance will be lost. That's my only concern. It's only a concern. It's
My
not.
question to you, Yashoda, is there that nuance even available to the dancers today? How
No,
many
that's
how
something
many
has to be
dancers
made.
are even creating that nuance, right, today?
No, you are absolutely right, Anuradha. You're coming from the present situation,
Yeah.
which is absolutely right. I'm going a little beyond that. What I'm saying is, once you have established this system and that line in the dancers, don't forget to go a little beyond that.
But you're getting me wrong then. You haven't understood. You're only focusing on the nrittas, Yashoda. I'm sorry.
I'm not. No, no. Even with your characters, Anuradha, even in the presentation of the characters, there is a little more, even with the Angika, even if it is Nritta, the way Nritta has been delineated in the Natya Shastra is a little more nuanced than this. And I'm doing this after reading more than your thesis also. And I'm in complete appreciation of the system. I'm just saying there is something called reading of literature and internalizing the literature. Internalizing the culture also. Maybe that part should not. This is only something I'm saying outside the thesis for the next another step ahead. That cannot be compromised.
Are you talking about the losing the cultural,
Creativity.
cultural contextual? I completely
Yes.
agree with you. I'm not. You cannot take that away. You cannot take
That's
that away. That's not the point, right? The point is
Yes.
to develop tools for communication, and then, in fact, I very specifically say in my thesis that perhaps just sometimes when you become good at a technique, you then want to go to the source and you want
Yes.
to understand the context more. You want to understand the cultural context. Because
Yes.
in cultural context, we have such embodied movements, right? We have embodied movements which are very culturally tied. And children that grow up here don't have that cultural context necessarily.
Exactly. That's my concern.
How do you expect to tell them that, oh, this is how it is? And they say, but we don't feel shy. Why should we do this to feel shy? For example.
Right.
They don't have that cultural context.
Yes.
So my question is, if you can give dancers tools to truly make movement, embody movement for themselves, let them go through this process of understanding movement. How can I best? I find actors in this country incredibly effective. What is it? They create rasa in me. I am completely moved by acting. They use the Laban's efforts theory. And it's incredibly subtle, right? So if you can get really good at abhinaya through this, then you want to, because you are an Indian, you have the Indian heritage, and you would then go into the context and understand.
Thank you, Yashoda. Thank you,
Thank you,
Anuradha.
Anuradha.
Going beyond time.
Just one more observation
It's
is that
going beyond time, Yashoda.
yes, sir, I get it. Just 1 minute, sir. Your incomplete efforts was done very well, Anuradha. That was a very nice part.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I have a word, sir? Sir, can I have a
No,
word?
let us first finish. The examiners have to finish. Huh? Examiners guide, then anybody else. Then the process. Anuradha, thank you very much for this out-of-box wonderful case.
Thank you.
I have, Yashoda exhausted all content questions, so I will talk about from the point of view of thesis, what should have been done better. If I say that you did not focus so much on 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4 as much as you did for the LBMs, do you agree with me or what is your difference?
Yeah, I agree with you, because that was meant more for a point of departure for me to delve into LBMS. I didn't want to just go straight into LBMS without giving some kind of parallels, finding complementarities and differences. That purpose and not for to get deeply into that, primarily because and points of comparison or difference.
But the thesis becomes a complete thesis when your focus is not overly on one particular part and less on another part. Do you agree?
My view was a little bit different to that. I didn't view it as two equal halves, I guess. I viewed it as background to launch the thesis.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you saw that in equal emphasis.
But the background should have been also done systematically. Because the titles 2.1.1 as Satvika Vinaya does not hold good. There is nothing about Satvika Vinaya under that heading. You have not written anything on Satvika Vinaya under 2.1.1. Similarly, in 2.2, you have given verses about Saustavam, did not name the chapter or the verses from where they have taken. Else,
कनेक्ट ऑटोमेटिकली आता करूँगा कनेक्ट इट इज कनेक्टेड आई थिंक
Abhinaya within brackets expression in dance.
Yeah, to communicate.
So I would see, because this thesis is otherwise very perfect. Of loose translations, lack of references, or giving the proper number of the verbs. For example, yato hasta tato drishtihi. Where is it from? You have not mentioned. When you mention a verse, these are the things I want you to incorporate before you send the book for printing.
Okay.
And reference. Where in glossary, why did you give only English words? What happens to all the technical terminology from the Indian non-English words? Where is the glossary for that?
Okay, I was thinking because my audience is, the readers are primarily Indian, so I didn't, they were mostly self-explanatory, so I didn't use them.
Readers are primarily Indians, you know, day in and day out. Every dancer performing a Tarangam or something like that gives the life history of Narayan Tirtha, Tarangam, Krishna, who is Krishna, what is Krishna. Every day in and day out, the audience are all Indian. You know, your MC will speak about entire history of Krishna and Avatara, you know what. So that does not justify. You have to have glossary means all non-English words first. Second thing, who is M. Bose?
Manmohan Bose. You're talking about Ghosh or Bose?
G-O-S-C.
Ghosh, Manmohan Ghosh.
Manmohan Ghosh is M.M. Ghosh. Mandakranta Bose is
Oh,
M.
you're talking about Mandakranta Bose, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and because when you say M. Ghosh and said his, are you talking about Mandakranta Ghosh or are you talking about M.M. Ghosh?
Oh,
If it is M.M. Ghosh, you see, there is a sampradaya. M. Ghosh is not Manmohan Ghosh. M.M. Ghosh is Manmohan. Similarly, A. Rao. A. Rao is nobody by A. Rao wrote any book on Natyashastra or anything. P.S. or Appar.
upper.
So you have to have your references properly done. And I'm very happy with your conclusions, particularly the 9 conclusions you have given. Can you just tell me, in your presentation you said,